You're tuned in to Ask the Master Auto Technician. Car questions? Get answers right now. Call 850-763-0555.
James Auto Center, we fix it right, guaranteed. Beep, 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 yeah.
All right, good morning, everybody. This is James Morris along with Anna Marie Morris. We're coming live high atop James Auto Center. We're not atop of the building, but we're inside the building with our bright lights on and our television cameras rolling. And we got Rob Lapham calling all the way from Port St. Joe. Is that where you're calling from, Rob?
You bet. From the county, however, I'm only about 300 yards from the state county line.
Well,
Even though the address is Port St. Joe, I'm closer to you than you think.
Well, it's an amazing thing about that. It's a lot of things have transpired in the last week. It apparently appears that you're only going to be running against, for serious contention, not a Democrat, but a Republicans. It looks like the Democratic field is going to give up their incumbency and run for governor. Gwen Graham.
Right. That's what the incumbent announced. Gwen Graham said so, and so I'm sure it's a fact.
Wow.
What that means, of course, is the Democrats are not going to fail to put a nominee in there, but I look on it more as a sacrificial entrant into the game. I still think there'll be three people on the November ballot, namely the Republican who wins among the four of them who are competing now, and the Democrat, and me, the Libertarian. So I think there are three on the ballot in November.
Okay, let me ask you a difference. Okay, the biggest thing is we know Gwen Graham's not going to run, so we're going to have a sacrificial Democrat running. What is the biggest difference between the Republicans and the Libertarians? I know the Republicans say, well, we're physically conservative and we're for smaller government, and I kind of look at them funny and my eyes kind of cross about that time. But tell me, Rob, what's the biggest difference? I mean, other than what they say with their lips, their actions say one thing, their words say another. So, I mean, what's the biggest difference between Republicans and Libertarians?
Well, James, they talk a good game. On the fiscal side of things, of course, they're always talking about smaller government. They have never done it in 87 years, even when they had total control of the House, which, all the money bills originate there. On the programs, on the philosophy, of course, they do not agree with our socially tolerant, socially liberal issues. And so, for example, conservative Republicans figure it's okay to invade the bedroom. I'm talking about private actions between consenting adults. I'm talking about pot, for example. I don't happen to smoke pot. Don't think you do. If you did, it wouldn't bother me at all. That's a libertarian philosophy. Live and let live. Do no harm.
That's right.
Republicans don't agree with that. But there are other issues. Whereas we have general agreement on fiscal conservatism, not that they do it, but then they talk that game. We disagree mostly on socially liberal issues.
Tell me about the fair tax, consumption tax. What is your stance on having a consumption tax? We just had Larry Walters on here talking about it. Is the Libertarian Party? I know I am personally against all tax, but unfortunately, that's not going to happen in the real world.
Sure.
So, what is your viewpoint?
And I am going to talk with Larry later today. Excuse me, have a real...
Hey, it's early in the morning. Get another cup of coffee. I'm trying to get myself woke up, too.
I had one anymore. James, I favor, for sure, I favor a consumption tax as a replacement for the federal income tax. To repeat what's been mentioned before, today the tax code itself, I'm talking about the federal income tax, is over 76,000 pages big. Nobody has ever read it, to my knowledge. Nobody I know has ever read it. Nobody understands it. Only the tax lawyers and the tax accountants like it. We've got to get rid of it because it is an impossible to manage. The problem is there is so much social engineering in the tax code. So if you have a consumption tax, then it is really very easy to administer. The only issue or the accommodation that I would argue makes sense on a consumption tax is you do have people who are legitimately poor. And in the same fashion as today for the food stamp program, they call it EBT, the electronic card that food stamp recipients use when they buy groceries. I would have an EBT-like card for the people who are poor, and I'm talking about means-tested poverty, not some phony, attempt to get money out of the government. But for those people, they should be exempted from the consumption tax. And
Yes.
so you have 14% of the total population would be entitled to that relief. The other 86% would be paying the consumption tax. And I believe I'm in favor with where Larry is coming from, but I haven't met the gentleman. I am going to call him later this morning.
All right, well, the thing is, one of the things they're talking about, I've done some research on it, there would be a means testing where if you do fall below a certain point, you get that money back for the basics in life that you've been paying taxes on, like toothpaste, groceries, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Kind of like an EBT card, I guess, in a way. But the biggest thing I like about it is everybody pays tax. Because right now, is it around 47% of the American public that don't pay any taxes at all? Am I?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, well, they don't pay any federal income tax.
Right.
They presumably are hit up if they're working with FICA, with Social Security, and so forth. But I do believe it is correct. It's in the high 40%. And if you don't pay any tax, then you don't have any vested interest in what our government's doing. You just presumably you go to vote to keep the same guys in office who have created the mess in the first place.
That's what I was thinking about yesterday. It seems it seems like we want to perpetuate our enslavement. And I hate to say that, but that's exactly what it is. We want to, it's kind of like everybody's sheep, and we're voting for the guy, the sheep herder that takes care of us and feeds us, and eventually that sheep herder is going to sell us off to the market to be butchered. And I kind of feel that way. I feel like a lot of people are just sheep out there, and they're not aware that they're actually encouraging their enslavement by keep voting for the same people in office, expecting different results, and we get the same thing over and over again. And that's one of the reasons Yes.
Democracy does not just happen. You have to fight for it, and I don't mean fight necessarily in a literal sense, but you do have to educate yourself. Too many people go to the voting booth, vote for the last name they saw on a billboard, that type of approach. And that's really destructive.
It is.
And it really is incumbent on all of us to become familiar with the issues and come to a decision on what particular policies work for you, and not just follow whatever they saw on the last TV news program, for example.
What do you think do you think it's the dumbing down or just of America, or just people just have lost their interest in government because they've been entertained and fed, like circuses and bread? Yeah, I mean, is that what it's we've gone back from freedom back to bondage by allowing this bondage? Is that the Tytler cycle, I think, is the name of it, where you go from bondage and slavery back to liberty, back into bondage again. You just keep repeating the cycle over and over again. And I feel like America is repeating the cycle. We're trying to get a monarchy. We've turned over the three branches of government. A lot of the a lot of the legislative branch has turned its power over to the executive branch, and they're real proud of it. I talked to them before in our Congress, and they said, "Oh, we don't have time to make these appointments. We'll just let the executive do it." And I go, "You're giving your power away." I asked Steve Sutherland before Gwen Graham. I said, "You're giving your power away. I cannot believe you are abdicating your power to pick and to approve or disapprove of appointments." And they go, "Oh, we just don't have time for that." And I went, "Okay, you get paid $175,000 a year. You get a $500,000 expense account, and you don't have time." And it just drives me crazy.
James, the only thing wrong with what you have just said is that it's not a $500,000 expense account. It's $1.3 million on top of their
I'm sorry,
$174,000 salary. So they're pulling a lot more money than perhaps some of the reports.
Wow.
In any case, what I really do agree with you is the dumbing down of education. There was a study out in the last one that I'm aware of 20 years ago, ranked U.S. students as number one in history and math. And we all know studies can be moved one way or another, and different studies don't necessarily agree. But that was a pretty important study, and nice to see that our kids were number one.
Right.
So now there's a recent survey 4 months ago. Let's see, CNY Central, I guess that's NewYorkCentral.com. And this new survey in reading and math rates our kids 36th in the world. In other words, almost every other developed country is cranking out kids with far better reading and math skills than we have. And anecdotally, when you watch on TV, and I forget who's doing it now, but Jay Leno used to go out
man on the street
into the park and ask folks common questions. Who's this person? They put up a picture of George Washington. Yeah. People didn't know who it was. this kind of thing. People just totally ignorant of our history, our culture, and they've come through our great public school system that spends more, on average, across the thousands of school districts in the country, spends more on our kids than any other country. And it is it's a real shame that our kids are not better educated. And then that transfers to the voting booth. A lot of them don't know what they're voting for.
A lot of it, I think, is because we do not insist. Well, here's a perfect example. You go ask kids what kind of country we have here. What do we have, a democracy or republic? And 99.9% will tell you we have a democracy. And I want to look at them and go, thank you very much for your input. And I want to slap them, but I can't do that because, but we, they kind of frown on it when you start slapping kids. But, I go, hey, I want to let you know we're not a democracy. And when I've said that in front of students at schools, the teacher will look at me like, how dare you say that? And I say, ma'am, we are a republic. A democracy is democracy explained like this: are two wolves and a lamb arguing what's for lunch. And that is democracy. It's mob rule. But a republic is two wolves and a lamb arguing what's for lunch, and the lamb is well armed. That's a republic where the minority is protected. And we don't have that. We have mob rule right now. 50 plus 1, you get what you want. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. We will eventually...
James, you mentioned you like to smack somebody around the head. And it reminds me, I went... my family moved off to England when I was very young, and I went to school over there. Was sent to what the British call public school, and we would call it a boarding school. But you're there, 24/7 in that environment. And when you misbehaved, and I'm saying, say I'm like 12 years old or something, a master, which is a teacher, you'd be bent over and 6 of the best with a cane. I'm talking about some really heavy action on my rear end. And frankly, I think I was caned as many times as any other kid in the school during my first year. I thought, coming from the U.S., the whole system I thought they were a bunch of communists. I did not like the discipline at all. But I'll tell you this, I worked harder at that school and that environment, and I honestly don't think without the discipline I would have worked as hard in school as I did, and I think it's produced a benefit. And teachers today, they don't have the power. How do you discipline an unruly child? And then you have the rest of the kids who are in the particular class who are disadvantaged by disruption.
Absolutely.
And I really like, frankly, I'm very much in favor of charter schools, private schools, anything other than the public environment where there is such a lack of responsibility. And frankly, I blame organized labor and the teachers' unions for that. And it's really disappointing.
Yeah, there's a lot of areas we've touched. If people want to know more about it, it's robforcongress.org. They can find out what your platform is. They can find out when you're meeting. I know we will be at First Friday, not the first week in May, but the first week in June after the National Convention, where we pick our presidential candidate, the Libertarian Party, and we'll be at First Friday, and we'll be out there promoting our presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party, as well as Rob Lapham for our Congress, District 2, in the first Friday Fest in June in Panama City. So we hope to have you there as well, Rob, and that way you can be meeting people at First Friday Fest in downtown Panama City. I just sprung this on you, so you have no idea. So
James, I will look forward to being there. I will block out the First Friday. That's the afternoon or evening.
It's going to be in the evening, and it's going to be from 5 to 10 o'clock at night. My wife and I were talking about it, how we need to have at least 10 volunteers to help man the booth. That way we can be talking to people. We do not want to be near the band because you can't talk when you're next to the band. You need to be away from the bands. We know from experience, we're professional Friday Festers. We know all about Friday Fest. All right, thank you.
I'm really looking forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it. Rob, you be good. I'll talk to you next Tuesday at 6:15 my time, 7:15 in St. Joe Eastern Time out there. You be good. We'll talk to you later. Bye-bye, everybody.
James Auto Center, we fix it right, guaranteed. Beep, 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 yeah.